Oh, okay. I was going to hide it till later.
It's too big time.
Eminent Chancellor, President, Board of Governors, graduates, friends, and family, it's a great honor to be here today. When I give speeches, I know the first part of the speech where it starts. I have no idea where the speech will end. So this is an experience for both of us today. But half a century ago, that's more than 50 years ago, I was a student at University of Alberta, and I was probably sitting in a room like this at some convocation. But that same, I was a student, and after my second year, I was awarded or whatever, selected to enter medical school. In those days, you only had to go to college for 2 years, and if you applied and your marks looked reasonable, you were allowed to go to medical school. But at the same time, I was offered a scholarship to go to the Memorial University in Newfoundland. And I grabbed that opportunity over medical school because it could take a train ride. The longest train ride in Canada possible was from Edmonton to St. John's, Newfoundland, also going across Newfoundland on what was then called the Newfie Bullet. It's no longer there. So I didn't go to medical school. Had I gone to medical school, probably this year I would have been retiring as the doctor in the small town of Castor where I grew up. That's about 100 miles southeast of here, just south of the Battle River. It's a small town, 1,000 population on a good day. And I grew up there, and I thought and I believed that that was the most incredible place a young person could grow up. There was so much to do. There was so much interaction with people. It was just an impossible time to do even half of what you wanted to do or could do. The word boredom never existed in a town like that. And my plan was to go back and be the village doctor, but I was subverted. Now, many of you come from rural backgrounds, and when I was younger, I found that people, especially some urban people, looked down, or at least held their nose a little higher or sneered a little bit at rural people because they weren't as cool as they were. But I found out that that was a disadvantage to many of those people, because when I went to apply for scholarships or other awards like that, I had a great advantage coming from a rural area because I knew how to interact with people. In a small town, you have to know how to work with many people. You interact with them, and your reputation is really important. It doesn't take much to screw it up. If you are found to be a cheater or a liar, everybody knows that, and you carry that with you for as long as you live in that town. And from this experience, I would like to say to those of you who are from rural areas and from small towns that you have a tremendous advantage over many, many people in this world because you have a background and a basic integrity that most and many rural people or urban people do not have. So also I found that if you come from a small town, you believe in the humanity and the goodness of people, that it's very basic, that most people in the world are good. Some other parts of the world, this might not be the standard, but I find that that is, at least where I grew up in Alberta and this part of the country, this was the truth. And this is something that I believe, coming from a smaller area, that you have a great chance to grow on, and especially in Augustana University, those are the principles and some of the background that this institution has. So be proud of that. And let me tell you some stories that bear upon growing up in rural areas and how it has affected my life, and I'm sure it has affected yours. And the first story I'll tell you is long and involved, but I think a little bit of interesting, and it has elements of trust and fairness about growing up in a rural area and how that has transformed, at least in my life. In 1971, that's a long time ago, I guess, I took a 5-month backpacking trip, and it started in, of course, Alberta, and went across Canada, went across Europe, and across Russia. Yes, you could do it in those days if you were willing to be patient and not frighten people. You could go across Russia, and I took a month to do that. I went from the western part of Russia. Came in on East Germany, went across Poland, went across Russia, came out on the east side, took a boat over to Japan. Then I dropped down about 10 degrees and came back through Nepal, Burma, Thailand, and India, places like that. But in 1971, historically, you'll remember there was a war in that area called the Bangladesh War. And I came in there about after the 3rd week, and things were pretty chaotic. And I ended up with no money, no food, and no way to get out of the country. I didn't have a ticket, and there were no airlines flying anyway. I heard after a few days that there was a flight probably going to go to London on British Airways to pick up some stranded sailors. So I went to the airport, and in those days you didn't have credit cards, there were no cell phones, internet wasn't invented, and telephone calls, if you could make them, cost you a whole bunch, and you had to book them a few days ahead, but during the war, everything was blacked out. So I had really no resources, except I had a check on a bank account in Swansea, Wales, at Lloyd's Bank, because I'd had an account there some years before, and it had been closed, and of course there was no money in the account, but somehow in my backpack, which was all of my lifelong possessions, I had a blank check. So I went to the airlines, wrote out the check, and said I'd like to fly on that flight. And they said, well, okay, come back in a couple days, we'll check out your check. I came back 2 days later, of course, expecting them to say, you know, I'm sorry, your check was no good. But they gave me a ticket, and they said, your flight leaves in 2 days in the evening. And I was totally flabbergasted, but happy, of course, because I was a little hungry at that time, and I needed to get out of the country because the war was a little chaotic. And when I got to the UK, I, of course, felt a little guilty for having written a bad check, but somebody had stood for me. So I took a train out to Wales and found the banker who had signed that check. And I asked him, why on earth did you do that? I thank you, but why did you do that? And he said, well, I looked up, when I got this check, I looked up your record when you had applied for an account at this bank, and it said that you were from a rural area in Canada, in Alberta. And he then said, any student who would apply to come to the University of Wales had to be a student who wanted to study and not party. And he also said, from looking at your record, I figured you might be trustworthy. And he did say, though, after I was leaving, I did think 2 things. Anybody who would write a check from India with no money in an account must be in real dire need or must be crazy. I'm very glad that he didn't focus on the last part of that. After I left, I, of course, made good on the check, but I didn't have to. I could have just disappeared. And it took me 3 days to get out to Wales and to find him and to tell him I would make it up. But I could have just disappeared because he had no way of knowing me, of checking up on me or anything. But he trusted me, and in turn, I was fair to pay him back. I wrote a very nice letter to the head of Lloyd's Bank, where he was employed, And I actually sent it to the headquarters, and I heard about 8 years later when I went back to Wales and inquired that he was moving up in the ranks of management. So I'd like to think that my letter helped him a bit. But maybe on the other side, his trust in people and his ability to discern trust in other people probably helped him as much. And that is just one small lesson of many that you'll have in life, where two things are really important, and that's trust and fairness. And trust when there's no way to check up on you, and fairness when nobody can look upon you. Very, very important things to do. Now you students didn't know that you're going to have an exam before you get out of here today. And those of you who don't pass won't get one of those. I have a globe here, and I'm going to put my hand over Augustana and bring it down slowly. And I want you, pretend that some of you are going to be teachers and you're in a school now, and you have a globe like this, and you ask the students, draw me a picture of how thick the world's atmosphere is. Okay, the size of this globe, thickness of the atmosphere, okay? And I want to hear your votes, loud and clear. I'm going to bring my hand down, and I want to hear you tell me when you think we're at top of 90% of the world's air. First vote. Some say higher. Most of you are not committing, are you? Hey, there's the ones that know. They did their science. I put 2 of my gray hairs on top of cameras here. That's as thick as 90% of the world's atmosphere. Think about that for a minute. It's extremely thin. When you fly on an aircraft from here to Calgary, or from Edmonton to Calgary, 90% of the mass of the world's air is beneath the aircraft. 90%. At 6,000 meters, half of the world's air. A good high-powered rifle will shoot through half of the world's atmosphere. It's very thin. Now, mankind is changing that atmosphere very rapidly. If you burn 1 liter of gasoline, you produce 3 kilograms of carbon dioxide. 1 liter, 3 kilograms. Of those 3 kilograms, half of them will stay in the atmosphere for 1,000 years. So what? Why do we care about CO2 in the air? The CO2 in the atmosphere acts like a feather in a feather bed. The world is heated from below, not above. The sun comes zipping through the atmosphere, hits the surface, changes to a long-wave radiation, and that radiates up, and that's what warms the atmosphere. If you don't believe me, why do you go to the mountains in the summer to get cool? You're going up higher, you should be closer to the sun, you should be warmer. It's exactly the opposite. So as the Earth is being heated from below, carbon dioxide molecules capture little bits of heat exactly the same way as a feather in a feather bed. So the world's atmosphere is a global feather bed. Since the 1800s, mankind has doubled the number of feathers in that bed. So we are holding a lot more heat. Basic physics cannot be argued. And the basic physics is that we've changed the atmosphere such that we are in an experiment now of changing the temperature of the Earth. And it cannot be stopped unless we stop using fossil fuels, and that is probably an unrealistic. So there's going to be some people on the Earth that are going to benefit from climate change or global warming. Others will feel it. But all of us will talk a lot about it, and we'll know that it's happening. Now, my time is running out. Back to Swansea, Wales. did you ever wonder, or just a few minutes ago, ask yourself, how did I end up in Swansea, Wales? I won a scholarship to any university in the world, basically. I might have gone to Harvard or Oxford or someplace, but I wanted to join the sexual revolution. That may not mean much to you nowadays, but in our days, the world was pretty puritanical, and the only place that really had a different sexual mores was Sweden. So on my application, they said, where do you want to go? And my writing is atrocious. I would have made a good MD because of my bad writing. I wrote Sweden, but only thing that they could read when they got the application was S, W, vowel, and then some scribble. So after a long time, they figured out I wanted to go to Swansea. If any of you know anything about Swansea, in Wales, it's the most conservative university in the United Kingdom, and it has a reputation for that. So it was a little bit of a surprise to me when I got there. But my rural Albertan values really fit in rather well to the culture, and I really enjoyed it there, and I still have friends that I had made in those 45, 50 years ago. In fact, my roommate ended up marrying an American girl that I had brought by for him to visit, and she stayed there, and he became a Queen's Court judge, with the ones that wear those frilly tops and those big red pantaloons with white panties and white. Pretty funny to see him anyway. So in closing, people are supposed to tell you great things about what's going to happen to you, but I really can't tell you much other than a few words of wisdom, and in that it's your environment, your politics, your livelihoods, and your lifestyles will change dramatically, more than you could ever think. Just talk to your parents and grandparents and ask them what it was like in their lives when it was your age. And it's amazing, the things that you take for granted now weren't even around when I was a student. And as the president said, things like social media. I grew up without water and sewer in the house. I grew up without computers, without cell phones, without internet. Those are all very recent things. Without cars, we had cars, but very few people used them. So your life is going to change more dramatically than your parents and grandparents. So please take time to ask them what they've gone through, and then multiply it probably by 3 to 5, because that's what the change you're going to see. So at this point, I wish you well in this exciting journey, which I can assure you will be fantastic. Thank you.